ask
You
about
guys ready? You guys
Thanks
ready?
again, by the way.
We're ready.
Yeah.
Ready?
All right.
Ready.
All right. Hello. All right. Welcome everyone. Today, as I gave them a little lead in, me, Palstron, and Captain Lance are interviewing the gracious Jonathan Rogers up here at 9:01 a.m. in New Zealand for them. Very, very early for a game developer, as he was just telling us a few minutes ago. We're going to be asking him some questions about PoE 2. Very exciting. We got a whole host of them to ask, and we're ready to get going. I don't know if any of you guys want to introduce yourselves or anything. Feel free to go around the table and just say hello real quickly.
Oh, hello. Yeah, my name's as you just said. My name's Jonathan Rogers, and I'm the game director on PoE 2. Not much else to say.
Lance?
All right. I'm Lance. I play a lot of PoE 1s. I'm an addict, but I'm really excited for PoE 2 and hopefully gonna try to get some good answers here. We'll see.
I'm Pal. I make PoE stuff as well. I'm also an addict. So yeah, I make YouTube stuff, Twitch stuff.
All right.
There
Okay,
you go.
let me let's see, getting some feedback that Jonathan's a little quiet. Let's see if I can turn him up. I'm gonna turn him up to 200% volume.
All
There we
right.
go. All right. Yeah, you guys let me know in chat if the volume is down. And yeah. All right. Hey, Jonathan. I was at the LA event. If you
Right.
didn't know, I don't know.
I mean, it was very busy. Honestly, I wish I had had more time to just go around and talk to everyone. But it was a very tight schedule because I was flying out that evening. So next time we do an event like that, I'm definitely going to reserve more time to just walk around and chat to people and get to know them a bit better.
Yeah. Happy to be able to talk to you now. So with that feedback, yeah, I am the only person of these three people that has played Path of Exile 2 yet. I was also at Exile
Right,
1
okay.
too. So I've played it at both of them.
Mhm.
So that's gonna be my perspective. So the first thing that I wanted to ask about, I think, is probably the biggest thing that we've seen so far is WASD and what WASD has done to the game. The fact that you had to rebalance it. Oh, hold on. People in YouTube are saying that we're getting all of the tech stuff sorted out real quick. Hopefully, I'm going to just
Okay.
turn these things on. All right. Hopefully, YouTube has sound now. WASD dramatically changed the game in
Mhm.
some very interesting ways. I'm not going to try to lead the question with my opinions on it, but it felt like I was playing a very, very different game. And you clearly had to rebalance the way that monsters worked. Very, very interactive gameplay. And I just want to start off asking how, what's been the feedback from that so far with that big of a change to the game? And, are you going to go further down that line around WASD? And, we'll just open open-ended there a little bit.
So definitely, we've had a huge positive response from that element. Like, I think that was the thing, honestly, that surprised the most people at that event about what the feel of that was like and how much it changes the game. I definitely think that. I've even said there, like the way it changed the game. Like, we had to be really open-minded to the kinds of like implications that would have. And I think probably one of the biggest ones there was trying to get rid of the idea that click to move and WASD necessarily have to be completely balanced against each other. Because when we first did it, we kind of had this idea of like, if we put WASD in, we have to make it so that click to move people aren't disadvantaged by that. And I think that the change of mindset around that was really important because it led to like a huge amount of things that we could that we could improve on. So effectively, like WASD probably will have a slight advantage. Not as much as you might expect, but it is one of those things that I think has just led to just much better action combat overall. And so that is something that we just kind of had to do. And since LA, we've been doing more of the work that we need to do to get more skills able to be used while moving. At the LA event, a lot of the sorceress skills were still requiring a stop in order to be able to use them, and now we've changed a lot of those over. And then as we're working on other classes as well, we're doing further changes in that direction. So we now have all spellcast animations now allow for movement. Like, we've changed all of the animations over to allow for them, whether or not we act like. And now the decision about whether something has to be a stop or not is now a balance decision rather than like a technical problem, if you know what I mean. Like, we can say that your character has to come to a stop for a given skill, but that is now a decision that we just get to make based on feel and everything, rather than because we just couldn't do it anymore. And that did require a huge amount of animation work to get to be able to happen. Especially because spells, unlike attacks, can be used with any weapon type. So there's like a vastly larger number of animations that implies. But yeah, we're doing the work for that and getting all of that sorted. And so yeah, now as I said, it's just a balance thing. And so what that'll mean sometimes is like, oh, like as you start using the skill, your like character comes to like like slows down slowly and then speeds up again afterwards and that kind of thing. It kind of just depends on the feel. But it is nice to be able to have control over that, and I think it's just really improved the game.
Yeah, I mean,
All right.
yeah, go ahead, Palstrom.
Oh no. I was gonna ask, since you now basically have this new game that you want to feel a lot different. There's other games in the genre that just came out recently
Mhm.
that also try new stuff. Like, for example,
Right,
you
right.
talked about Ori, how you really like that game.
Mhm.
And now that No Rest for the Wicked is out, do you have any thoughts or maybe takeaways from how that game was received in general? Maybe some things that have you reconsidered stuff.
So it's actually very interesting looking at that game because I think that game is what people fear that PoE 2 is in a way.
Oh, that's funny.
Because like that game is really what you get if you really slow the game down, if you know what I mean. Like that
Yeah.
is very much a much more slower paced game with like stamina and all of those kind of mechanics from those games. And so really,
Durability.
yeah, I mean that game I would say, yeah, sure, durability. That game really is what I would. I mean, okay, so durability aside, right? Because I think that's a different type of mechanic than the type of the combat stuff that we're talking about. So as far as combat goes, what they've done is they've embraced like the sort of maximum kinetic feel of what combat can feel like by slowing it down that much, they've effectively made it so that like every attack feels like an absolute frickin' slam to the face. You know what I mean? Like it's just like the camera moves and screen shaking, like everything just like up to like absolute 11. But in order to do that, you have to slow the game down a huge amount as a decision, but it certainly isn't what we've done. Like people look at our game and say we've slowed it down, but we have not slowed it down to the degree that like I think some weapons in that game have like 6-second default attacks. That's like a different level as far as like a much more methodical feel. So PoE isn't like that, and I think that's something that people have feared in our player base, that will be a real like a really slow game. And as I said, I don't think that's what we're going for. But that being said, it is quite nice to look at that game and appreciate some of the combat stuff they've got going on. They do have some really excellent feel on some of their attacks. And I think we can still do a little bit better even without slowing things down. I think there's still some stuff we can do to improve. So yeah, like I'm just do that. But what I don't like about it, I would say, is the feeling of losing control of your character. And it happens in two ways. One of them is that you get committed to these really long attacks and you don't really have the ability to change direction so much with a lot of them, like how like where you're going. So that feeling, I think, the feeling of losing control there is bad. In my opinion. And then the other one is that because of their stamina system, you get a similar effect where if you run out of stamina, you can't do anything because everything uses stamina, including the dodge roll and all that stuff. So you kind of just feel like, oh crap, suddenly I'm pushing a button, my character's not responding. And so that's kind of the part about the combat system that I don't like, is just that feeling of losing control. Yeah, I guess that's kind of where I'm at with that. But as I said, where they have succeeded really well is just the kinetic feeling of hitting stuff does feel really good. Yeah, just not the same type of game in the end, I think. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about it, if you guys have been playing it, and what you guys think about it.
I've mostly just looked at the reviews and I've seen
Right.
gameplay of it. And
Right.
I mean, the community is kind of split between, is it an actual ARPG? But I
Right,
mean,
right.
the genre is very vast. I would say it probably
Right.
still falls in
Well,
there.
they had some.
It's not a hack and slash, right? Like it's more, yeah.
Right. It definitely isn't a hack and slash. But the reviews, I think, the first like day, the durability system was like ultra punishing. And then they changed that really quickly. I actually got soft locked myself at the beginning of that game due to the durability system. I guess I like to think I have some idea what I'm doing when it comes to playing a game like this. So yeah, it definitely was like way too easy to soft lock yourself with durability in that game. Then they did some patches and it's a lot more forgiving now. I guess the other thing as well is that that's a game that relies heavily on consumables. And so that kind of means that inherently it is hard for them to do a balance that's going to allow you to just like, you can't just die over and over in that game with zero cost. Even so, I mean, other than the fact, like, because there's like three different costs. There's like the durability, there's the consumables that you're using. Wait, no, I guess it's just two, right? Yeah, sure. There's those two costs to dying, and so then that just means that yeah, like it changes the feel, I think, in a way that I'm not so like that's the way that you get soft lock. So in PoE 2 though, you can die to a boss and it's fine. There's zero cost to that. You just die, you try again, and it's fine. I mean, the only cost is the time you spent playing against it. And so that quick reload, I think, means that we can be more punishing on bosses than if we didn't do that. Whereas they've got punishing bosses, but also the cost. So yeah, that's kind of the issue there. So yeah, that's kind of my feelings on that game. I definitely am keen to play more of it. I got to the end of the content, I'm keen to try more. I do like I sort of vacillate between whether or not I really love it or not. I definitely have sort of a few mixed feelings, but I definitely think there's a lot of potential there. So I'm definitely keen to play more.
Yeah,
Sounds good.
kind of related to that with going back to WASD a little bit. I
Mhm.
found PoE 2 very button intensive, to
Right.
say the least, with WASD.
Mhm.
Regarding like boss fights, it felt awesome having that amount of control over my character. But I
Right.
do have to say, like fighting trash monsters and going through just particularly if you died and you have to redo a zone and like
Mhm.
really taking your time methodically through all those encounters, like that type of gameplay, is that intended to kind of stay all the way through PoE until the end game, or is it just like we're kind of building up into something a little bit different and things get a little bit more automated and you kind of can get into more of a flow state?
So I guess there's a few things I would say. One of them is that for the amount of time that you had, I don't know that you necessarily had enough time to kind of build the level of like it's because the game's so different than what you're used to playing. I don't know if you've had the time to sort of build the muscle memory of like what you're doing with your character to kind of get to the point where you do get that flow state. Because I definitely feel like you do get that after several more hours.
For reference,
Like
unfortunately, I played Sork, so it
right,
also
okay, sure, sure.
it also comes with
Um,
that. Yeah.
Right. But like the generally speaking, when you're fighting against trash monsters, I wouldn't expect that you use most of the time more than kind of like sort of 3 to 4 skills. But the main thing is that you still get like a spike of like oh crap, here's a monster that's gonna that's gonna be hard. I need to think about this for a second. You know what I mean? And I think that having that moment of having to like a new challenge has arrived. I need to actually do that. Sort of keeps the engagement up, which I quite like. Um, there is more automation towards the end game. So we've got all the spirit systems, and so you definitely get to that point where things get more where you can effectively choose to do more automation at the expense of potentially some efficiency. But I do want to make sure that there is a certain level of engagement, and especially in the case of bosses, like a boss should feel engaging to fight against. I really don't love it when you kind of have the you kill a boss in 5 seconds, and I mean, sure, that can happen if you get really ultra geared, but I prefer at least the first time you fight a boss generally it to feel like there's some challenge. You have to learn the mechanics and do some and do some stuff around that. So that's the main thing. I just don't want people to trivialize bosses too much the first time they fight them. Obviously, you're going to get like good to the point where you can start to really do that, and that's just the nature of an RPG where you've got stats and everything. You can pump your stats to the point where you're just really awesome. But yeah, ideally, at least the first time you're taking the boss seriously. In the LA demo, I think there were a few characters who managed to trivialize some of the bosses by like in certain ways, and that wasn't fully intentional. Like you should be able to find a good item and kind of do very well, but there were a couple of people I think who managed to find a few strategies that I think were not quite right. But yeah, that's kind of the something that happens, I guess, and we'll work it out. But I think the other thing as well, post LA, is that I guess there were two other pieces of feedback. One of them was that people falling into like not having good enough items, and we've tried to solve that with gold. So we increase the amount of gold that you get quite a lot, and that means that you can fix your problems with the shop a lot more easily. And the other big one was the flask system, and people unhappy with that. So we are actually changing the flask system as well.
Oh,
Um,
can you
yeah,
tell?
so I guess it's interesting because when we looked at the issue there, the main thing that I wanted to make happen was that player state matters more. And in PoE 1, it's very easy uh, flasks to like for you to effectively just have infinite flasks. Like you kill a pack and your flasks are all just factor full, and so effectively your character is just the same after you kill a pack as it was beforehand. And I wanted to address that by making it so that white monsters didn't drop flask charges. But the problem we ran into is effectively there's just very little tolerance for having to go back to town in order to recharge your flasks. And it was interesting because when I look at other games that have mechanics like that, they tend to like there's a lot of, once again, you've got the kind of Elden Ring style games, where they've got like, a limited number of flask charges and that's fine and it works. They seem to be fine with that, but in PoE it doesn't seem to be fine. And I was kind of like questioning like, why is that? Like, what's the reason why? And it felt like the issue was that we're in this kind of middle ground with the version we have. So it's like we could either go more hardcore or we could go more casual with regard to this. So if we were like, we did decide to go like basically walk back to more like how PoE 1 is in this regard. But the way we could have decided to go was like more hardcore. We're effectively like, what if we just like straight up like didn't have town portaling? Like what if you just had to like get through a zone without running out of flash charges or something like that? So we sort of discussed that for a while, but in the end we rejected it, and we decided to basically go to a more PoE 1 like system. But the one change that we are making, that we still need to make sure that is actually going to work, that I think will improve things with regard to PoE 1, is that in PoE 1 all monsters give you a single flash charge. And I think that actually isn't good, because what it means is that fighting big monsters and fighting small monsters, you have to effectively balance the flash charges around fighting lots of big monsters, because if you have lots of little monsters, and then what that means is that all the little monsters are going to be lots of flash charges. So what we're going to do is we're going to change it so that the flash charges are no longer like guaranteed 1 per kill. Instead, we're going to have it be based on what's called monster effectiveness, which is like an internal metric, which is effectively like how hard a monster is. And what that will mean is that when you're killing like lots of little trash mobs, they might have like a 30% chance to give you a flash charge each, because you can like kill hundreds of them. And when you're fighting big monsters, they might give you like 2 flash charges each, because they're like way more damaging than the little ones are. And what that should mean is that we can effectively have a much better balance control over the amount of flash charge generation, and we should be able to, ideally with that, nail it exactly right, so that you don't, if you have the right flasks, that you won't ever have to go back to town. But if you have the wrong number of flasks, then you will have to go to if you don't have enough flasks, or you haven't got like recent ones or something like that, that you still will have to go back to town in that case. But the idea is that you need to keep up with your flask charge generation. But if you're doing the right thing, you never have to go back. And I think that's probably the thing that players will probably appreciate, just the fact that you can, if you gear yourself correctly, then you never have to go back to town, which seems to be basically one of the major complaints that we had at the event. So I think that change will hopefully address all of those concerns, and we should end up with something that is both better than PoE 1, but also not having the problems that the current system had. So I guess we'll see how we go with that once we try it out. But yeah, that's what we're changing there.
Just to harp a little bit back on, you said the flask system is going to be a little bit more towards PoE 1 again. Is that only about the flash charges that you just talked about, or does that also mean so it's still going to be reactive flasks though, right? Like
yes,
not like in PoE 1 where it's basically
auras. Yes, we're not going to. So we're not going to do the thing where you're constantly just keeping a buff up effectively. That's still important to me. But yeah, effectively just making sure that we don't have that kind of like. So people just didn't appreciate the town cycle thing. We actually came up with like a lot of kind of crazy ideas around this. But yeah, in the end we decided that going back to more of what PoE 1 had was probably just going to be fine. As far as just making it so you don't have to usually go back.
Okay.
All right, well, that was kind of a long answer.
Yeah, just a little add on there. Is there any concern with the amount of buttons that you press, considering with the flat, you get the full WASD? I found it pretty intense.
Right.
Or just not intense. Like there was a time where I was like trying to hold W and D, and I had to use my pinky finger to press a flask, and yeah, it definitely becomes a little intense with having 5 different flasks, and I had to use Flame Wall, Frostbolt, Ice Nova, Cold Snap, and try to move around at the same time. Is there like
I mean, okay, like it is, there's certainly a lot of buttons there. I don't think personally that it goes above my level of like uncomfortableness around that. I mean, obviously you seem to like you feel differently, right? But then I'm not really sure what we could do about that, as long as we want to also have like skill variety. The flask thing is certainly something that I've looked at. Like, so what I have noticed from looking at people who are completely like new to action RPGs playing the game is that the main thing that they find challenging is using flasks. Like the having to care about like what your health is doing and what your mana is doing is a thing that new players find difficult. But at the same time, I don't really want to just like remove flasks or something like that, or make them auto use or something like that. Like that doesn't feel right. That is just a hard one to solve. Like at the end of the day, you need to pay a bit of attention to that stuff. But as I said, I think you kind of get used to how it is, and it's fine. One thing that I do think is important is, and something you couldn't do in the demo you did, is rebinding the keys. I think that the ones we chose for the defaults there were not so good, and experimenting with using Z and C instead for the extra controls instead of F and R and T, I think actually helps a lot as far as like the finger dexterity goes. But sure, it can still be an issue when you're trying to flask at the same time as using your as moving around. But
Is there?
Go on.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No,
I was just going to ask about like instilling orbs and stuff like that. Maybe certain conditions are met if a certain flask is pressed, even if you only let that happen on like one or two different flasks, not maybe automate all of them, but have a little bit more agency over that, maybe.
For the end game, I'm okay with having some of those kind of automation type systems for flasks,
Mhm.
but certainly, but I mean, what I'm talking about with new players, there is literally like the very beginning of the game when you're just like, like the second area of the game and stuff like that. Like new players
Sure.
definitely still find it to be a little bit of a challenge to just notice the fact that they're low on life, and so on. And it's something that I wouldn't necessarily have expected because I guess playing action RPGs for so long, I'm just used to the idea that like, oh yeah, pay attention to your life, like use the flasks at the right time. But as I said, I just noticed that it's something that that newer players tend to have trouble with.
Okay.
I think I'm kind of, if we're all good on the button question, I kind of want to move on to
Mhm.
about a little bit of build making in
Mhm.
PoE 2, just because I'm curious. Currently, PoE is like this huge sandbox of
Mhm.
freedom of whatever you want to do. You can make it happen. You can make a
Mhm.
spellcasting champion, even though he looks like a melee character, you can
Mhm.
make it work to some degree. And then on the other spectrum, a lot of ARPGs say if you're this class, you get this skill.
Right.
Is PoE 2 going to fall similar, like right where PoE is in terms of freedom, or is they going to try to restrict that, or what?
So
What's the
it's
overall scope
definitely
looking like?
it is absolutely PoE one's philosophy here. The only actual difference is that we've restricted skills that use weapons to that weapon type, but so which does reduce the degree to which you can use certain skills. However, spells can still be used with all weapon types. You can use a spell from any class or any other class, etc. Just like how PoE one is. We still have the tree and so on, like how that works. So that is still that freedom. Um, but the main thing is that when we're presenting the system to new users, we try to present it as if there's like, here's the skills for your class, even though that's not really the case. Because we want to make sure, like, just to give you the, like, if you're a new user and you don't understand, like, it is much easier to just be like, here are your choices, right? Like, and sure, there's all these other tabs here that have all of the skills for the other classes, and you could just pick them and you could just use those. But for a new player, we want to make it seem as if, oh, here are the ones that you should be choosing, if you know what I mean, just to like guide you down a path that's going to be easier for you, while still allowing all of the ability to explore outside of that. And what I'm imagining is that the weapon swap stuff that we've got in PoE 2 now will just allow for an absolute explosion of like weird build stuff that goes on, and it should definitely allow that. One of the other things that happened in that maybe I believe it was in the LA build, but I can't remember, is that attributes now you can choose which attribute you want. Like all attribute nodes allow you to choose from any of the three. And that's actually partly to allow for making it so that you can more easily go into other class specializations, even from the early game if you want, while starting still in the place for the class that you're starting in. So we're definitely keen on the more sort of sandboxy build design thing. That's still our philosophy.
That is
I get
awesome. I was hoping you'd say that. But and then
with
allowing people to have that sort of focus initially will solve the other problem of throwing so many skills at them, it overwhelms, but then it takes it away.
Right.
Awesome.
I mean, one of the things even that we've been doing since the LA event, because we've been focusing more on support gems, is and in terms of like making things appear like your choices are restricted while actually not being at all, is the uncut support gem, which is the thing that allows you to pick what support gem you want to pick. The way the UI for that works is that you can click on like a socket that isn't filled, for one of the skills that you have, and then it shows you what support gems could go there that would work with the skill that you've got. And so once again, it really very much looks like the kind of system where like you've got a skill, here are some ways you can expand that skill. But then reality, of course, you can just pick, from any of the support gems that you want, and you can freely move them and so on. But it's just by presenting it that way, you kind of just get that like much better ease of use, and like the idea that like, like it just looks like, here are some things that are going to improve the skill. So that kind of presentation really does help, I think.
So I guess to go back to that, so you guys want people to press more buttons, want to have more than one skill being used, and the way you do that is obviously with a lot of synergies towards the skills. Do you have just exactly what Lance said right now? Do you have any consideration that this might be leading to a gameplay where it feels like you kind of shoehorned into certain skill combinations, where it feels like the devs are kind of making the build for you, or
That is something that our devs take very seriously. Like, it definitely comes up all the time. And anytime we're ever talking about the skill works with that skill, there's always the intention to try and broaden the conditions under which it occurs. So, for example, with that the ranger that I showed at the meetup, you've got the lightning bolt that hits the ground, and then you can use lightning arrow to bounce arcs between it. But it does work with any arc, and like we try to make sure that like other skills that have anything that looks like it is an arc kind of like work. So for example, other arcs that you've got like just arc, the skill that the sorceress has. You've got the arcs that come from the what's it called? Geez, I don't remember the name of the skill now, but the lightning ball that you put on the ground, and then every time you use a lightning skill near it, it arcs to nearby enemies. I can't remember what it's called now.
Orb Storms.
And then there's also
Orb Storms.
Orb Storms.
Orb Storms.
Yeah, I'm terrible with names. Then basically any other skill that has like arcs of lightning, like it'll work with that. And so as I said, we just try and make sure that like these things can work with as many types of skills as possible. And in some cases we might make a category, and there's only one skill that kind of fits the definition right now, but the intention is always to expand the number of skills that it can work with. And that basically is how we sort of ensure that we're not like picking the build for you. But at the same time, there needs to be stuff that looks obvious to players at the start of the game, so they can feel like they've got build synergy without having to like think too hard. And so the game needs to sort of present those things to you fairly well. So it's just a question of making sure that they're general enough. And I mean, I think that we've mostly done that. There are people on the dev team though who like you make the skill and it can only really work with that one, and that's a problem. And we just have to sort of bear that in mind and try to expand the categories as much as we can.
Now, with that said, are we anticipating that it requires that amount of like an insane amount of work to make a build that works in the end game? Or with some of the curated skills that have that synergy, are we anticipating maybe a first or second time player being able to kind of logically put together something that works and feels decent in the end game? Because PoE 1 absolutely like lost that years ago.
Right. That's a very hard question to answer, I think, because it depends a bit on your definition of what endgame even is. Like, I think even a basic player can come up with something that's going to work in like the first few tiers of maps. That shouldn't really be an issue. It's a question of how deep should the point be. Like, how far into the end game should it be that you require that you've done something that isn't obvious? And I don't even know really what the answer to that question should be. Like, you want to have room for your skill to improve. Like, that is important. But then at the same time, like, they're kind of no one feels like they should ever get to the point where what they're doing isn't okay. Like, that kind of like it can be sort of a bad feeling. So that really is a bit of a tough one, right? Like how do we define that? And I really don't have an answer. All I can say is that we'll just do it by feel and see what we end up with. It's really hard to have a more compelling answer to that question than that. But effectively. That is a tension for sure. And ideally we can, at the very least, you need to be able to get through the campaign, assuming that you're not like a complete idiot. You should be able to get through the campaign without running into major issues. Like, sure, maybe it'll take you a few more deaths to each boss than what some other people might take if you pick some suboptimal choices, but it should be possible to get through the campaign.
All right, I'm gonna save that voice line for later. Okay.
Okay.
Anyone who complains about the campaign in PoE 2, Jonathan says you're an idiot.
Well,
okay.
all right. I mean, that
good.
implies we get the balance perfect, but sure.
All right.
At least that's the goal, right? So there you go.
Yeah. I guess Sup, you wanted to ask about third-party tools, I think?
Oh
Sure.
yeah. So again, kind of related. That's
Mhm.
that's actually what I was reading when I asked the question that I said before.
Sure.
So yeah, exact same line of questioning. We might just get the same answer right now. Is like PoE1 to do basically anything to feel comfortable playing the game right now is it just went down the rabbit hole of third party tools. But it's been like kind of synergistic as well, where it feels like as players have gotten better doing things using these third party tools, whether it's crafting, making a build, or trading, the devs have been receptive to that in a certain way, and it's kind of been like a synergy both through game balance and all of that. But now it's kind of this obstacle where there's a huge ramp up time. There's this reliance on third party tools to feel that comfort. Like, how are you going to craft? Well, here, go to one of these websites or whatever. Is that something that is being addressed and trying to being like nipped in the bud right off the bat with PoE2, integrating it, making it more beginner friendly, that ramp up time better, or are we just kind of saying, hey, PoE, whether it's 1 or 2, are just very complex games, and there's a line that we have to draw with, like, hey, we can't just like put the whole wiki in there in your face.
So I mean, I definitely have very mixed opinions about this one, and it sort of depends on the situation. My general feeling in the past has been that if the community, well, so first of all, the community will make tools no matter what we do, right? Like we can't stop that from happening. So there will always be a path of building, like that kind of tool going on, right? So like the idea of somehow stopping that from happening certainly can't happen. So the question then is, how much of that do we put in the game, and that kind of stuff. And generally speaking, I'm in favor of doing anything in game that doesn't feel like it takes you out of the game or doesn't kind of give you so like even as much as I talked about like giving you an obvious path to follow, I don't want to make your decisions for you. And so anything that's going to feel like the game effectively like makes your decision for you, I definitely don't want to do that. But it really comes down to the case by case. And I mean, I've talked before about things like the item filter, like item filter creation in the game client, and me kind of being like, oh, you might like it's easier to do that out in a web browser than it is in the game client, and that kind of stuff. Like I've talked about that. So it really comes down to the specific tool. And so I'd ask you then, like, if you have particular opinions about specific tools, like let's go through what tools you're talking about, and we can discuss each on a case by case basis what I feel about each one, and you'll probably get a more honestly productive answer that way. So rattle them off, and we'll talk about them.
Pob?
So path of building. So in the case of path of building, definitely never will be in the game client, and the reason for that is ultimately what path of building is a way to check what happens with your items without you getting them, and that's kind of not something that I want players who aren't like specifically seeking that to be able to do. Like you should get the item before you can actually test how it works. So that one not going to happen. But that being said, I am fine with more tools in the game client around finding out what will happen for items you do already have. So like I've already talked about the fact that being able to see what the changes to your character are based on equipping a certain item, this kind of thing in game, I'm fine with. But what I'm not okay with is like, what if I had all these items? Like, what would my character look like? Like that's kind of not the type of thing that I think the game should be doing. And third-party tools are better for that kind of stuff.
I guess to talk about damage tooltips for a second, because I saw you talk about that with Josh. When it comes to enemy debuffs and stuff like that, you can't really show that at the tooltip or like pen or anything like that. Is there any consideration that might actually deceive players into undervaluing certain stats versus
So
other
it
stats
could.
that are more obvious?
I see what you mean. So what you're saying is, yeah, because the debuff is, your build relies on putting this debuff on enemy
Penetration.
before you do
Yep.
stuff, and there's no way to see that. So that is definitely a concern. However, I guess what I'd say in the case of the debuff thing, I would say that that most players I think can understand that. What is more annoying is that there are skills that show like their damage is really low for various reasons that aren't to do with debuffs. They're just to do with the way that like the assumptions that we're making around calculating the damage. And what I'm trying to do with that is actually display what our assumptions are. So first of all, we're going to be improving the way that we calculate damage for a lot of these things. And then the second thing is that we're going to state our assumptions. So for example, like a thing that I think is important is like, okay, you've got this AoE skill. It'll say like against one enemy or something like that, and it's like it's kind of obvious when you see that. They're like, okay, well, if we're talking Ice Nova, right? Like, sure, it doesn't do much damage against one enemy, but like, so the expectation obviously there is like that you'll that you'll be able to hit more than one of them, and then you kind of get the idea from that what's going on. And where it gets more complicated is you've got a skill like double slam that hits twice. So in the way in PoE2 right now, the damage tooltip for double slam is not good. It shows you each slam at a DPS for each one, which doesn't even make sense. What I want to do instead is we show the hit value for each slam, and then we've got an overarching DPS for both of the slams. And the assumption is that if a monster is hit by both slams, and so effectively, like, you've got a DPS, and we'll say, like, if you hit by both slams. And then what we can do is, for each skill, we want to decide what we think is the sort of the normal case for that skill, and then kind of display DPS with the assumption that case is occurring. Like for a skill like the ice combo, we have to use it 3 times in a row. Like, we'll show DPS as like assuming you use all 3 parts of the combo. And then that way we can kind of like establish that. So effectively, we do have to do some custom work for each skill to make sure that we understand like what the right conditions are. But I think that it will be a lot less deceptive as far as things go. And I do want to make sure that the all the values that we show, like, I never want to lie in a tooltip if we can get away with it. Like, and I do think that PoE1 has cases where they're definitely showing incorrect information. So ideally, like, even if we can't show information that's correct, we can at least show even if we can't show the most useful information, I should say, we should at least show correct information that states what the assumptions are that we use to get to that information. If you know what I'm saying. So that's kind of my feeling about this, is like, like, sure, there are some cases that are just going to be really difficult, but that's like a thing. But then the question you might have is like, okay, so why can't I simulate what happens if shock is applied to an enemy or something like that? And like, I just feel like that's such a big rabbit hole that I don't think the game should really be going down it.
Yeah, more of the question that I would have is, usually when you have green and red numbers in a game, you kind of over rely on them because you kind of get used to them, and you don't really, because you said earlier it's kind of obvious that penetration would not be on the tooltip, but for some people, like, if you're over reliant on it and maybe you're not even like reading every single item, you're just hovering over and just
no, I understand. No, that is definitely a danger, and that I think that comes down to not being so keen on displaying that information. Like, okay, so first start, you do have to hold a button to see this information, and we're not necessarily going to because of the way that it shows the DPS for each skill rather than just for one skill. It's not like there's just like boiling down your things to one number. Like, you'll sort of see the differences for a variety of your different attacks that you have on your character. And it's certainly the case that there's going to be things that, like, I actually don't know how we would create a system that could fully inform you nicely in the game client under every situation you could possibly, like, we don't know what situation matters, and you'd effectively have to allow a path of building like thing where you can say, like, oh, assuming these debuffs and assuming that, and as I said, it's just
that was not my implication.
And as I said,
sure.
it's an endless path.
Is it I know it's always memed about, but like, is there, I'm forgetting the reason for not having a target dummy. Is it like architecture reason, or
no, it isn't architecture. That one, it's interesting. Okay, right. So the reason for that one is because this is especially a Chris thing. He really doesn't like the idea of making a situation where you can get unlimited uptime on a target and just optimize for just that. Now, in PoE2, we're going to add the damage numbers to the above the health bar for bosses, and that will effectively let you see how well your build does against a real enemy. But because when you're doing that, you have to actually have real damage uptime, like, it is actually a realistic situation that will give you like an actual good DPS value that you can use against a real target. So that will effectively do that. But we weren't so keen on the target dummy still.
Okay.
So basically, if you want to use a target dummy, find a boss, go kill it, and you'll know what your DPS is against that boss. That is kind of like the way that we intend to solve it. But that isn't an architectural thing, as I said. We are going to have to do some changes to get the DPS, the damage value sent to the client. But that is something that I think is important. And now that we understand a way to do that without like losing immersion, then we're happy to do that. So that'll effectively let you get those kind of that information from the actual game client of like, how much damage am I actually dealing when I fight this boss.
Okay.
This is kind of a sidetrack on the third-party tool thing, just because of morbid curiosity. Where would you think on a tool like Awaken PoE Trade, which is pretty widely used in a trade economy?
Absolutely. I do think that there would be room to put something like that in the game, but that isn't the biggest problem that trade has right now. The biggest problems that trade has are things we've already talked about, which is the whole, the fact there's no buyouts and everything, right? So we're going to be solving that problem. And then the solution to as I've already talked about on another podcast, like having like, the solutions that we're planning on doing there. And then after we've done that, then we can potentially think about like what we want to do as far as like market values for certain things. I'm a little bit hesitant about that one. It does technically meet the definition of something that you could argue should be in the game client. What I most don't like about that mod, I guess, is just that. Well, no, I guess. Well, no, there's really no way around it, right? Like that's just something that's something that can happen, and therefore it will happen. So yeah, I guess that's just kind of one of those things. But sure, I understand why, of course, there's that. But the thing we mostly need to fix around trade is just to do with the fact that, you've got the whole like giant list of people and none of them respond to you and like all that crap. So we need to sort that problem out first. I think that's the bigger problem with trade right now. So we'll sort that one out first.
What do you feel about?
I'm gonna.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry,
Go on.
good.
Yeah, what do you feel
No,
about
please.
just the last third-party tool that I'm thinking of right now? It's just like things that desecrate the GGPK and they explode it and they get all of the stats and everything. Sometimes kind of inaccurately, we've seen as well.
Well, that's going to happen. Ideally, I would actually want to put as much information server-side only as I can and as little on the client as possible. And I don't know if I can really explain that philosophy other than just the fact that in general, like I'm a believer in the idea of just like information security and not exposing any information that isn't strictly necessary to the client. That being like, I mean, it would be nice if I had like some weeks without anyone bothering me. I would love to go and like improve all of that stuff so that we can hide way more information. But ultimately, anything you send to the client is fair game for people to reverse engineer, and that's just how things are. So like I don't like some developers. I think feel annoyed when people reverse engineer their stuff, and personally, I'm kind of like, yeah, sure, it's going to obviously happen, right? Like it's on us for putting that information in that package. If we put something there, we should expect players to know it. So then to me, I'm just like, I just like the engineering challenge of like, hey, what can we not have the client know? I'm of that opinion. So yeah, we've got a few things around that to like make it so like we don't show like certain things that are very easy to separate, like drop rates and so on, are very easy to hide in the server. But there's certain things that are just very inconvenient and not to split between the client and the server, and we didn't do the work to get that done. So yeah, I'd love to improve that and just have even less information in the client package, but we've got what we've got for now, at least.
So I'll try and pull the conversation a little bit into maybe something we haven't heard yet, like endgame, for example. We've heard a lot about campaign, and obviously a robust campaign is important for even an RPG, right? But what's important for people coming back is like endgame, gameplay loop, stuff like that. And even if you can't share specifics about the endgame, what would you want the endgame loop in PoE 2 to be? Do you want it to be similar to PoE 1? Is there something that you didn't like about PoE 1's endgame that you don't want to repeat? Any mistakes that you don't want to repeat? Or how would you, for example, like somebody has 3 hours of gaming time after they come back from work, and what would you like them to do? Or like, how would
overall, I think the loop should be very similar to PoE 1. As far as mistakes go, this is a tricky one.
T17s.
I
didn't say that.
I don't know. Like, I have some thoughts about this, but they're not really coalesced enough to really easily discuss them. But it's like it's just something to do with the fact that I liked how the endgame was more sort of about like 4 years ago. And it's very hard to kind of like exactly explain like what exact changes it was that kind of led to where we are now. We tried to sort of improve some of them with the scarab stuff, but effectively it just came down to like the reason why we did the scarabs is because we were really keen to avoid the kind of like, it felt like you were doing a bunch of stuff that wasn't enjoyable before each map. So ideally the scarabs have improved that situation. But then there was obviously some balance issues with them and various like mechanics that allowed them to combine in weird ways and so on. But ultimately, yeah, it's like it's going to be map running that you're doing, with of course the other different various end games that you can do that we like to have. Like lots of different variety of content that you can approach. But yeah, like as I said, I don't know that it's very easy for me to specifically talk about like, okay, what exact little changes was it that led to the situation we're in right now. I don't think it's like that bad, really, but like,
I wasn't really even trying to like completely make a jump to PU1. I was just in general like how
right.
you're approaching endgame and stuff like that as well.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, as I said, the overall approach is very similar. It's
Okay.
just that, like, what is it? I wish I could sort of like say what I'm trying to talk about a little bit more easily here, but it's like, there was less of a I don't think I can quite. It's something to do with the difficulty of content and people's expectations around what content they can do. But I just don't know if I can quite exactly assemble the right answer around it. But as I said, ultimately the end game will be like the loop will be very similar.
Okay.
It's just a question of like the specific details, I guess. That's probably not a very satisfying answer, but unfortunately that's what we'll go with for now. All right.
That's fair. Speaking of, encroaching more towards, I'm going to say, balance of what PoE2 will look like in comparison to maybe PoE1. Right now, we're currently doing a lot of cycles where
Yeah.
we'll have some borrowed power and some permanent power. Is that something that you liked and would want to carry over into maybe your approach to PoE2, or not necessarily?
Well, I think when in PoE2's early days, there's going to be a lot more scope for just increasing power directly from leagues, because as we used to do all the time, that's just because there's going to be less stuff. Now, obviously, the thing we want to try and avoid is that you don't get to the point where things become so confusing. But I mean, that will happen eventually, just naturally, because as you add more and more content, there's just going to be more and more stuff, and it'll just get to that
For
point.
PoE3.
Yeah, exactly. Like that'll happen. But at the same time, like there will be more scope for just like straight up, like just this league introduces a thing. Then if we keep the league, then we keep the power. And I think that's likely to that's likely to be happening. And I mean, the nice thing, of course, is that as we're going to be, as we're doing new leagues, we're also planning on, re-adding some old ones as well. And when we do that, we get to, refactor a little bit how the reward systems worked and so on. So ideally, we'll be able to sort of do that in a way where it doesn't feel like the level of power increase is so good while still giving you options for crafting. But at the end of the day, anytime there is an option, if there's to be a viable choice between options, then one of the options has to be better than the other. Otherwise, what's the point of having a choice at all? Or at least it's better than. Or at least it's better in certain cases for certain players. So ultimately, any kind of option that you add, assuming that there's going to be someone enticed to pick it, must lead to some kind of power down the road somewhere. Therefore, more options, more power. It's just kind of unavoidable, I think. We'll just end up that way. So ultimately, I guess what we're saying is that, yeah, there's probably going to be a lot of power increases over time throughout PoE2's life. And sometimes we do the whole like temporary change thing, but I think that really is more of an artifact of late, like PoE1 being so so much older now, because there's been so much stuff that we kind of have to do that to even make things work still. Like we can't, we need to be able to add things that are going to excite players, but we also can't really keep those things, because if we did, it would just stack up to absolute infinity levels. The fact that we had a freaking life wraparound bug recently should tell you that we're starting to hit the limits of where it's possible to go as far as values are concerned. Yeah.
So a question I had about the passive skill tree is you just said earlier that, for example, the attributes are way more flexible. You can
Yep.
If I understood you correctly, you can choose which attributes you want while traveling.
Correct.
And in a different interview, you talked about percentage max life. This is a long time ago, so if that changed, just tell me. Percentage max life is not going to be on the tree anymore, for example.
Yes.
You want gear to be more impactful when it comes to defense. Maybe the base type matters more and stuff like that. I just wonder, we talked about everything you don't want on the passive tree, but what do you want people to get from the passive tree other than probably the normal increased damage, maybe a multi, everything you would normally find? Do you want to open design space there? Is there maybe going to be skills there? Are keystones going to be a little bit revamped or anything like that?
So generally speaking, what the skill tree is for is to increase your effectiveness with something that you've right. So generally speaking, what
Discord
did it
cut
just
out.
cut off for me?
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry,
Discord's
sorry.
cutting out.
So what I'm saying is the general idea with the passive skill tree is that it increases something. It effectively allows you to specialize in something that you're getting the base from somewhere else. So generally speaking, they're going to be percentage increases. We want to have a wide variety. Now, one of the things that we did change was we've changed mastery, so we've removed those, and we're making more of the notables be more interesting. So ideally, we do find ways to make it so that every notable has something kind of interesting on it, like where we previously put that in a mastery. We're now putting those in notables. And the reason for the stuff that we removed from the tree, as you were saying before, is just that we don't want to have anything on the tree that every player must always get. Like we want to make sure that everything that you actually allocate is a real choice, rather than just having like you must have at least 30 points and 30.
Well, the question would be, if you remove that, wouldn't that just make the next best thing a must-have, or are you just talking about in terms of defense?
Well, I mean, you could argue that, but what I'm saying is that like different life is not a specialization thing because everyone needed it. Whereas when you're looking at the different defenses, your character, depending what your gear is, wants different bonuses to different types of defenses. So effectively, like not everyone wants percentage energy shield, because like obviously if you don't have energy shield, you don't need that. So that's why that is fine, whereas life is not. And the same is true of I guess there's been some stuff around damage as well that we've kind of changed to, where we want to try and have more specialization around certain mechanics. I'm being a bit vague here, but we've got less like weapons specific damage specialization and more damage specialization around other unrelated. Well, I say unrelated, other kind of like mechanics that you could apply across a variety of different builds. So like it might be like damage while I've got a certain debuff on them, or it might be like damage for against monsters with X, or this kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Like
conditional damage,
these conditional damage stats and these kind of things. So those can work well. You have to be a little bit careful that you don't have too many of those, because sometimes they can put certain requirements on builds. But but we are trying to make sure that there's like a lot of variety of the ways that you can approach getting damage. And then the other thing, of course, is with the dual specialization, you can very often make those conditional stats work to your advantage really well, because you only get them while you're applying, while you're using certain skills. So that kind of allows you to do that. But as I said, generally speaking, the notables are more impactful. We try to remove anything that every player wants, and then the overall goal of the skill tree is to keep you is to specialize your character more. Generally speaking, anything flat we don't want to have on there. We want to try to have percentage increases and so on. I don't know if there's anything really other major, because the other thing of the keystones, where we want to just the keystones are supposed to change your build entirely, right? So they've got the downside and the upside and so on, and that's still basically the same philosophy. So other than that, I would say it's like mostly similar. There was a lot of discussion around some of the things we could change around the passive tree, and one of the ones that I think was probably the biggest one that we had to work out was, are we a type of game where the reason you don't get more of a stat is because there isn't more to get? Or are we the type of game where the reason you don't get more of a stat is because there's no advantage to getting more? So like, should there be more damage than returns? Like, should there be more damage than you can ever allocate? And that it's just a question of how much you allocate? Or is it that there's a limited amount of damage and you've got all of it now, so you have to do something else? And while there was some temptation to go down the road of like, we just limit the amount of stats that there are on the tree, I think we prefer, being the more sandboxy type of system that we are, to be more along the lines of, if you want to specialize all in on something, there's as many points as you could want for that thing. It's just that at some point it becomes detrimental due to the fact that your character now can't do whatever else it needs to be doing. So that's kind of the road we're attempting to go down. Which is very similar to what PoE1 was doing, although not entirely. And that's kind of the main thing. We're still staying with that philosophy.
I guess on that note, because you said get as many like sandboxy. Do you have any plans for cluster jewels? Do you already know if you want those to still be in the game, or?
I don't think they'll be in there at the start, because they're kind of a natural extension. I don't think they're fundamental to the system, as it were. But I don't see any reason we wouldn't have them later. Like, they are okay. We still have jewels in general in the tree. Like, we still that's all still there. I do like that, although we'll be changing the stats that you get on them a little bit. Like, there's some there's some stuff to fiddle about with there. But yeah, like in general, like I do like that system. I think it's good. So we'll clusters probably just a bit later. I think it's an easy feature to add.
Okay. I think got that there for a second.
I want to cut in just because this sticks out a little bit to me, that you say percentage energy shield can exist where percent life cannot, just because it's tied to your gear and whatnot. a lot of times when I'm making a character, I can get energy shield from a lot of different sources and somehow still have other things that are giving me armor or getting me evasion, and then
Yep.
energy shield ends up just kind of being a raw EHP number, just
Mhm.
like life. How do you make the distinction where it doesn't really feel like a raw EHP number where that can exist and life can't?
The reason why for that one is just literally because, once again, every character doesn't have energy shield. Like, some do, some do not, and so therefore it is actually a choice about, am I a character who is specializing in this or am I not? So while I do understand that it feels superficially very similar, it's still a choice there where life isn't. Like, you could argue that, on a higher level, you could argue it's the same, because you're like, okay, well, how many points am I putting in defenses? You have to have a certain amount in defense. And that is still absolutely the case, right? Like, you probably, if you're a character, should probably have some nodes allocated to defense. Otherwise, you're going to be a complete glass cannon. So on that level, you could say that's still like mandatory. But I think that it doesn't feel the same as what life did, where it's just like you just must have a certain amount. Like, you might as well not have had like the however many points it is that you have to put into life, that everyone always puts in. So it effectively reduced the degree to which you could actually specialize your character. That is why I feel it's different. And also, there is a real choice to make. Between different forms of defense, I think. And also, not only that, but there are keystones and uniques and all sorts of stuff that like change the way that those defenses work, such that you would also have different choices there. Whereas that was less the case for life. Well, of course, there was like there were some that just removed life, but it wasn't. I don't think that it was quite as varied and interesting as what the other defenses are.
I guess what Lance also means is that for energy shield builds, then they don't need life anymore. So are you kind of hinting that, for example, Chaos Inoculation is not going to be in the game anymore, and energy shield is more going to be an addition to life, or is that what you're saying? Kind of?
Chaos Inoculation is in the game still. I can tell
Okay.
you that. So that's still a
Okay.
thing.
Because if you're an ES character, life is also irrelevant, just like on a
Right.
life character, ES is irrelevant. So that's
Well, I
I think
mean,
that's kind of the equation.
Sure. I guess you could sort of argue that. I'm just trying to think back to the conversations, because Chaos Inoculation was a whole freaking mega discussion recently, due to us wanting to change slightly how Energy Shield works. Because there's like a few other changes around this that kind of like change the equation here a little bit. But I don't know if I have enough context in my mind still to talk about that. So yeah, we'll probably save that one for another day. But there was the concern that no, I probably can't. I probably don't have enough stuff to talk about specifically around this, but effectively, there are some changes to the way that chaos damage work, and also to some of the debuffs that were traditionally bypass energy shield as well. And like, so there's a few other things that we've fiddled around with there. But I
Okay.
just need to. I would probably better to talk to like Rory or something, who's like got the exact memory of exactly what we've changed here, because I don't quite remember well enough. But yeah, there's some stuff around this and CI and how it affects all this stuff that does matter.
All right.
Anyway.
I think.
All right, okay. We can pivot a little bit. I just wanted to ask a quick question about,
Mhm.
and I actually think that this could be really interesting. PoE 2 is in PoE 1, the game design is pretty anti-synergistic and antagonistic to casual party play in a lot of different ways. From the fact that you can have like one ignite on a monster, your curses are going to be overriding each other, people are running at different speeds, etc. Is there any thought to, and on the flip side, if you have a perfect party, you're getting godlike amounts of loot, which is a little bit different conversation for in a couple minutes. But is there any thought to making party play and casual co-op more, easy to drop into and beneficial for players in PoE 2?
So I do think it's important, not so a change we could make based on what you just said there is we don't allow people's mechanics to cancel each other out, as it were. Like, if one person is igniting, then the other person can also ignite or something like that. And I really don't like that idea, because I just feel like it goes against the kind of basic simulation that we're trying to sort of have here. But I do think that you'll find that, because there's a lot more world state that's part of your build. What I mean by that is, like, you can create more objects and like put monsters in certain states and so on. There's a lot more of that going on. I think that you'll just generally have a lot more synergy between different builds. Like there's a lot more cross-cutting things of like, one player puts something in a like near to stunnable state, and then the next player uses their ability that gets them over, and this kind of thing. There's all sorts of that stuff going on. So, as well as just being able to create abilities that then other classes can take advantage of, like one person creates a gas cloud and the other person explodes it and so on. So, I think that all of that stuff should lead to like, generally speaking, like a lot more possibility for synergy between party members. But at the same time, they're certainly still going to have a lot of those things that you just talked about, right? Where like, yes, if two players have both doing an ignite build, are not going to have a great time because of the fact that they both are relying on a buff that can only have one of on a character. And I just don't know that I want to solve that, because I think that it would break a lot of like I don't know what's the feeling. The feeling here of like it's not going to feel like a real simulation anymore the moment that you start breaking all of those rules. Yeah, I just prefer not to. As for things like run speed and so on, I guess I don't know. It is what it is. I don't really have a. I wouldn't say that I want to change something like that. It just you get what you get there. But so the issues with casual co-op, I guess, the issues you talk about there are surely more of an issue as you get later in the game anyway, right? Like, isn't that those kinds of like party things, aren't they really more of an in-game concern than a sort of campaign concern? You probably get pretty far in campaign just using casual, like those kind of casual like not having to worry about what your build does relative to the other person, I would imagine.
Yeah, this is definitely more of an end game question for sure.
Right. So, yeah, like, when it comes to that stuff, like to end game, I guess I feel a bit okay with the idea that you should consider what your other party members are doing to some extent. Like I guess I'm just okay with that. You know what I mean? Like having a little bit of synergy, I feel is interesting. So as I said, thinking about the different players. I just don't think that I would want to make a game where you can just ignore what everyone else is doing and just do your own thing, and you have exactly the same level of damage as if you weren't doing that. I think it takes away a lot of like what's interesting about like caring about the state of what monsters are doing and so on, away from the player. So that's just kind of my feeling on it anyway.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I have 20-year-old memories of being a little Fury Druid walking behind the Sork that killed Mephisto before I even even got through the door.
Sure.
Like I know what
Sure,
that's
sure.
like.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I also have memories of like certain games like Marvel Heroes in the past that have there's like more MMO inspired raids type of stuff, but there
Right.
have been cool instances of doing a boss fight with your friends and that kind of feeling really really good in an ARPG
Right.
setting. And
Right.
yeah, I think that like I really, I was trying not to load the question initially about WASD, but I love like that executioner fight. I not gonna lie, I got chills. I got tingles after I killed that boss. Like it was really really cool, and I was like, this is awesome. And I was just thinking what that would feel like learning that fight with my friends and just like being able to show
Right.
that to them and kind of doing that with my friends. And
So
yeah.
you can definitely do that. It's just that yes, there are going to be some build options that are going to be inherently cutting out there. It's just that I guess I don't feel like they rise to the level of the point where you can't just play with your friends easily enough. As it's really more of an in-game concern where the type of the type of scaling you're doing really does matter so much that that as soon as you cut one of those axes out due to like the Ignite example you had, right? Like if you're playing, like if you at end game in PoE 1, if you're playing an Ignite build, that's the only thing you're doing, and so therefore cutting that mechanic out is going to effectively just completely destroy your character. Like you just can't do anything with that. And I do think PoE 2 is less should overall have less of that problem, just due to the nature of the fact that you've got more skills that you're using and sort of more what's going on. But then at the same time, like yeah, like if your build, if you're playing in an in-game context, then that implies that you're playing at a difficulty where you can only just beat the content, like because you go as high as you can go, if you know what I mean. And if that is the case, and then you play with a party member who cancels out one of your mechanics, that's going to lead to a situation where you're not as effective as you were before, and you might not be able to beat the boss anymore. So yeah, that's a possibility. I just would hope that the synergy you can get from party members outweighs that. But it's a little bit hard to tell without really playing it more with the stuff. Like we haven't done a lot of multiplayer testing. And like especially not at endgame. So therefore, I guess we'll just have to sort of see about that. But yeah, I'm not really I guess I'm not like overly worried about this. I guess is what I would say. Like I think that it should be okay. I think it will be okay, and I'm hoping that you will have a good time with your friends when you choose to play with them. It just should be okay. Yeah.
PoE players don't have friends. Who are you fooling?
It's
Well, hopefully you do. Hopefully you do. Or maybe you met some of them playing the game. I would hope. It's funny because people. There was actually some metrics that we saw that basically showed that people who start the game with a friend are like, I don't remember the numbers now, but it was like way, way, way more likely to stick around than players who don't. So being introduced to the game by a friend is actually really, really important. As far as, and I suspect that's just partly to do with the complexity. But yeah, that's like something
I
that,
tried many times. Yeah, I tried
yeah,
many
yeah.
times, but
Right. Anyway,
now I'm gonna take us in a bit of a pretty different direction, just because I am very a big fan of a lot of uniques in this game.
Mhm.
Is there any chance you could give us an item you're specifically excited about that you've seen that you're like, this is awesome going into PoE2, unique
I
item wise?
I probably shouldn't spoil any particular uniques because those are the type of things that do have like marketing value, as it were, to like to do like around spoiler season, which I'm sure will happen for PoE2, like as we get
So this
closer
is a
towards
good
release.
marketing opportunity.
But I guess what I'll say as a general rule is that I am personally a big fan of uniques that change a lot about a character and also have like some kind of visual impact in the world as well. And we can't do that for every unique, but I do think it's fun when you have something, like, okay, like, well, sure, I'll spoil one then. I'll spoil one for you. All right. So like, and this is an existing unique, so I don't feel too bad about spoiling it and just how we're changing it. So the rat's nest in PoE2 has actual rats that come out of your out of your helmet and fall on the ground, and then the rats like go to corpses and do stuff. So that's an example of like taking something where like I think you can get the theme of it like just way cooler if you just put a little bit of work into into this kind of thing. So like yeah, like that I'm a fan of having uniques be more like I don't know, just like I don't know what the right word is exactly, but like because I mean they have gameplay impact even as, but it's like you can sort of see them and there's like a feeling that there's like when you put this on that it's got some kind of unique thing going on that's like not quite just like it's not just a stat, you know what I mean? Like it's actually a thing that's happening and like sure, so yeah, that's the kind of thing that I find quite fun. So that's an example of a change to a unique that's an existing unique, but it's got like a slightly different thing that it's doing. And
So
yeah.
we can expect some level of significant visual impact slash varied.
I mean, I'm not going to say that every single unique has that. Like, there's a lot of uniques that don't do that, or they just kind of do something. But it's okay. Like it's just like the little touches. Like okay. Random other really really simple one, right? So Redbeak. Redbeak in PoE2 has like you can see on the sword like it glows red when you're low in life. That's the low in life one, right? Is it below 50%
Yes.
or above 50%? Yeah, it's the below 50%. So like when it's below 50%, you can see on the sword that you're below 50% because that's like the trigger that makes the you get the thing. So like that's the kind of thing where like just those little touches can kind of like it's a minor thing, but it kind of just feels like the stat is something you can see. It isn't just something that like is just there, if you know what I mean. So that's the kind of thing where that's what I'm talking about, right? Just like little touches that make uniques feel unique. And that's the stuff I like.
Well, I appreciate you willing to share that. That's really exciting.
Right.
The aspect of that attention to detail, I think
Right.
a lot of people will really appreciate, especially because uniques are always these iconic, simplistic things. You look at it, you know it, and then
Right.
actually getting the feeling of seeing it on your character and that affects, I think that'll be a big winner. That's really cool.
I think people will like them. But yeah, as I said, those two are kind of okay since they're both just random PoE1 uniques that we're just porting over with like a few like little touches. But yeah, there's also obviously lots of uniques that were never in the game at all, and new uniques with interesting mechanics, and some of them do some pretty crazy shit. So yeah, and hopefully you'll enjoy them.
So next, I'd like to pick your brain a little bit about a pretty contentious topic in the PoE community right now, which is Magic Find.
Sure.
And you've already stated that it will be in PoE2, albeit in simpler form. and it will be on items as well.
Mhm.
Now, I don't represent the whole community here. This is, like I said, a very contentious topic, very split between
Yep.
the different factions. But in terms of what I dislike about the idea, it would be, for example, that it's a weird sort of concoction where you remove power from your character in order to get more items, which kind
Right.
of feels a little bit antithetical to the whole ARPG power fantasy, I guess, if you would call it like that. And at the same time, you also have this weird dynamic where your builds kind of become just these farming machines. You kind of tune them just to be farming machines for like a currency per hour, where you say, I'm going to sacrifice this gear slot, this gear slot, this gear slot, or this suffix. I think you said you wanted on rares now and not on uniques anymore, if I remember correctly. The new MF set, but
Well,
basically, or
uniques.
did that change?
Well, uniques. Well, nothing has really changed about that.
Okay,
Just to clarify, there are certain slots that have Magic Find on your character that res can get it. And then
okay, so
there are uniques that have Magic Find as well. But I mean, it's just a question of really a balance of like what we're making sure that the slots that we put it on are well considered and so on. But I
okay,
understand, right? Like, so I definitely
yeah,
understand. So there are definitely people on the design team as well who kind of there is the same faction split that happens of like some people like it, some people don't. I do think it's something that we could discuss again. But what it comes down to, I mean, the argument for it really comes down to the idea that it's another thing to optimize for your character once you've already beaten the ability to kill a boss, right? Because there's only so high the content can scale in the end. Because I mean, so the argument on the Force side of like why we shouldn't have Magic Find is that if damage is the only scaling that you can do on your character, then that means that the way you scale Magic Find is by scaling the level of content you can do, and it's a fair argument, right? Like I do understand that, but like there's really only, if we don't have Magic Find, there's really only two things you can scale up your character: the defenses and the damage. And having that third axis is really the main reason we want to do that, because there's not very many axes it can be on your character, so that is the argument. I guess like because it's so factionalized, like the two factions here, it's very hard for me to necessarily push the conversation one way or the other. Like people know the things about it, but all I can really do is just summarize the feelings. I would say that I might be willing to be persuaded on this one, so it kind of comes down to like where we end up. But it's definitely a topic worth coming up again. As I said, certain developers on the team very much on one side, certain developers very much on the other side. I don't really want more to add to the conversation other than that. But as I said, I don't know that I necessarily feel too strongly on one side or the other. But so therefore, I guess we'll go with what the most developers here kind of feel happy with, and that really is just the extra scaling axis is important.
Yeah, for sure. But the way I kind of feel it's a problem is in terms of itemization, the way you represent is you have this kind of like lever that you can pull where you like remove power and you add quant, which in theory sounds nice, but what ends up happening is you have these characters with these shitty uniques that are just the same on every character, and you have a situation where, for example, maybe the endgame content is not hard enough to where you actually need to put on real gear, and now everybody just runs around with the same amount of unique gear, or like even going further here. For example, an Emmy gives you 20 quant. It's like, okay,
Right.
now every unique amulet and every build that revolves around that unique amulet is
Right.
now basically invalidated because you're
Right.
now inefficient. And sure, that's not how every casual player would approach it, but it's definitely inhibiting in terms of like making builds on your own. And
I,
that comes
I
once again to this problem of seeing characters just as money making machines instead of like playing a game, right?
I do appreciate where you're coming from for sure. Like I definitely get it. And that might come down to the individual specific balance decisions of the individual uniques. It's certainly not good if the only amulet to ever run is just one amulet. Because I mean now effectively whatever design we put on any other amulet is irrelevant, and that's not really very good. So I guess that would imply then that we just have to really make sure that we're not going too far with the magic find on uniques. Because I guess the trade-off is less certain when you're coming down to rares, right? Because getting a good magic find rare is going to be harder. There's different.
The trade-off, yes. The trade-off, yes. You're just sacrificing a suffix instead of a whole item, but you still have the same problem where, okay, now in that slot, I would really like to use a rare, so that one stat is on my item. You have the
Sure.
same problem as the other way around. So it's kind of just a very hard thing to do, and it also gives us you problems in terms of endgame scaling, because now you have to exactly scale the endgame correctly to where it's hard enough so people can't run around with Magic Find gear in your hardest content. So it's also a pretty hard to balance around that, and it
Oh,
can
so
maybe
hang on.
like
So there you were saying that you have to balance it so that people can run around with Magic Find gear. Is that what you're saying?
no, I'm saying that you can't make it so people can run around in the hardest content in the game with Magic Find gear.
Oh, sure,
Because
sure, sure.
yeah.
But then
And
what
that's
do you?
a
But
hard
then
thing
what's
to
your
balance.
right? But then what's the alternative for that? So let's say there's no Magic Find,
Well, the
and
alternative to that was remove it from itemization and just have separate systems. Which I mean, you can say anything in this game is Magic Find. You can say the Atlas passive tree is
what
Magic
I'm
Find,
what
right?
I'm looking at though is like so say you didn't have it on items, you just scale like the only thing you're scaling then on items is defense and damage, right?
Yeah.
So
Movement speed. I
then
mean, you have other ways to increase your efficiency, like
or I guess movement speed technically counts, but
speed,
the thing is that it's not really on.
attack speed for your movement skill, right? Like stuff like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Like
yeah, sure,
there's
sure,
definitely
sure.
more
But
vectors than that. Yeah.
ultimately it comes
Variables.
down to damage, right? Like except for but movement speed doesn't, but everything else really comes down to damage. Like things like attack speed and so on are just really another form of damage when you come right down to it. Um, yeah. So movement speed, I guess there's an argument for it being different, sort of, but sure, all right. But let's say you do that. So let's look at what that results in now. So basically, if the the content on the on the atlas doesn't scale high enough, then you've just got extra damage that is worthless. And so what are you specializing in then? You kind of don't have another axis to invest in, right? Like if you've got too much damage, like you hit a point when there is nothing more you can do for your character, and so your character is done. If you know what I mean, like there's nothing else to optimize.
Yeah, but what's the difference? So you just instead put on like unique items that are just making your character weaker.
Right.
So
So
that's
now
like
there is.
so the
What I'm
solution to
saying is
that.
there is a thing where more stats then have a use for your character, and this is what I mean. This is where the argument is, right? Effectively,
Yeah.
that like you've got dead stats that you can't do anything with, and Magic Find gives you a way for something to be relevant, even in the case where the stats, like for damage and so on, would not be relevant anymore.
That would then be a problem with the endgame content where it's
Right.
not
So then,
there's not hard
so
enough
then,
content to do anything with your gearing.
right. So then, if you have the ability to scale your the endgame content to the highest amount of damage you could possibly scale it to, then you start to get into the issues around uh, like having content that's like okay. So when you've got content that only that you that is extremely hard to the point where only certain builds can do it, then you start to run into the situation where people will only run the builds that can do that content. This is actually
Sure.
the thing that I was trying to talk about before when I was talking about the in-game concerns, is that and this is a weird one, and I as I said, I don't have really a solution for it, but it's like if the content is so hard that only a few builds can do it, you just lower build diversity, and that's kind of a problem too. And it may not
But
seem like they're not exactly related to the Magic Find thing, but it sort of is a bit.
But you have the same
Yeah.
problem in that sense with Magic Find, just that
Right, yes,
the builds who are
because
more
what you're
powerful
saying
just
is
have
that you end
more
up just running.
quantity.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because you end up running
the
the
better
same
builds,
Yeah.
they have the same, they can run the same content, but now with like 70, 80 quant. So there's the same disparity. Just because they can run it doesn't mean that the other person is not just has a huge advantage. So that's just a skill gap, right? Not skill gap. I don't know, like certain skills being better than others, right? That still factors in whether you have MF or not.
It does, but I guess what I'm saying is that the number of builds that can work, if the content doesn't scale to the point where, like, okay, like if there's a bar that you have to clear, right, which is the top content, and most people would assume that a build, like, okay, if a build is viable, as it were, then it has to be able to clear the highest content of the game. Then if that bar is goes the higher that bar goes, the less builds are going to be included in it. And you could say, well, we'll just balance everything perfectly so that everything's the same. But I mean, that isn't really good either. It's like, you've got a problem. There has to be some variety going on, and like, sure, we try and do what we can, but it's not always going to. But effectively, the harder the content goes, the harder it is to actually balance the game to make the more enough builds viable. So that's just a random concern to have. And like, I want to really emphasize the fact here, by the way, that while I am making this argument from the side right now, like I do appreciate the arguments for Magic Find being removed as well. Like it is a thing that I am not unsympathetic to, right? But what I'm saying is I'm just like looking at the different cases. Like, so in the case where Magic Find doesn't exist, I feel like what you're going to have is that if the content is very hard, it's as hard as it can go. So effectively, you can always scale damage from Magic Find. You're going to run into the problem of the not enough build diversity. And if the content isn't hard enough, then you've got the problem of dead stats. And that may not seem like hugely compelling compared to the opposite side, which maybe it isn't. But I'm just kind of trying to like show you like some of the considerations.
I get where
that.
you're coming from. I'm just trying to counter that point with well, the best skills are still going to be played, just then with MF gear. It's still going to be that way. Well, that was just my point. Yeah.
So then what you're saying
Tornado
then
Shot
is
was
that
for
the
a
fact
while.
that
Tornado Shot, right? Like
right. So what you're then saying is that if the best build with MF gear is still the best, then people always play that over playing another build that can't do it without with MF gear. Is that what you're saying? Which I think is
that will always be an issue. That would always be an issue. Which I definitely think is true.
And it's true to some extent. I agree with that. But I guess what I'm saying is there's still a possibility then for that build to be somewhat viable at in-game content, and I do think that not everyone will do that. But then also, isn't the difference between the with the factions here of like MF gear versus not MF gear? Aren't those factions also divided among the people who are choosing to play with MF gear right now and those who are choosing not to? Like clearly there are people who would choose not to do it because they're choosing.
No, I'm not like just speaking for the whole community. There's definitely people who love MF. Like there's no question about that.
But look, I don't disagree that it's a conversation that we should probably have again internally, and I will have another serious conversation about this. The people who are against it, well, I mean, I know there are specific people who are against it, and I can probably.
I just wanted to pick your brain there. I just wanted to pick your brain.
But it is interesting. It isn't a conversation we've had for a little while, so it's probably worth having it again and seeing whether we still feel the same way about it. You're obviously in favor of no Magic Find.
I like the idea of like not being forced into certain gear pieces. Yeah.
And the two others on this call, what do you guys reckon?
I'm pretty indifferent about it in terms of I don't use it myself, but I don't feel it needs to be removed. I feel a lot of times, for me, PoE is all about like I want to just create something and I enjoy that, and I don't usually get pulled too much into this person's doing something really efficient. I have to be like them. Yeah. And so I don't feel as forced, but I think that happens to a lot of people.
But then when you are making a character, do you still feel the need for your build to be able to do the hardest content?
Typically that's usually my goal. I have a standard of like I want to be able to do this stuff, but I don't feel like I have to do that.
So you would be a prototypical example of a person who would run into the kind of issue I was referring to, I guess, of like if we make it so that the effective way to scale Magic Find is to scale damage by making it so that we just have like the content get harder and harder and harder to the point where like any amount of damage you can scale causes that, then you'll start to run into the issue of like you feel bad because you can't, using whatever other build you're trying to make, be able to kill the other content, defeat the hardest content, if you know what I mean.
I feel like I typically enjoy some level of, even though it does suck when you make a build that isn't good.
Right.
For me, failure I view as usually a good thing in terms of there's a reason I made something bad. What was that? Right. What can I learn from it? And if it's really hard, then it's a big challenge. But
right, understood.
I don't know how that would feel for other people.
Right. And you, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, the thing for me, I've been playing since Parandus League, and I think last league, or I played around with it just like for a couple days a few leagues ago, but basically until last league, I had never touched MF, because I never felt compelled to. But then with the wisps and everything, it genuinely felt really weird. And obviously, this is a sense of a scale and balance and everything, but it felt really weird. And the whole game ended up get twisted. And I think this is why it's coming to a head. The whole game got twisted last league, particularly, where all you had to do was slap on the generic quant gear. You could do T7 maps, I think. I think it was T7 maps.
Yes. So now, here's the thing that I do think is bad. I do think that it's bad whenever you can be getting more items, or more value, I should say, from playing lower level maps than higher level ones. I think that is definitely a bad thing. But that I think was more of an issue with the league than it was with MF gear as such. Like it was that's definitely a problem. So I definitely don't like that, and I want to avoid that at all costs. Like it should always be advantageous to do higher level content. as far as getting wealth is concerned.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
But yeah, it's still, even I eventually did scale it up into T16s. Like, I even took my little SRS Guardian that was just supposed to be like a comfy quality life build, and I slapped
mhm,
MF gear on it, and I was dropping, tens and tens of divines per map basically. And
right,
any build that you wanted to make last league, and I think that this is the big issue for like the build creators like Palstron, right? It was
mhm,
like any build last league, the number one question is like, how do I fit Magic Find into this gear? And it turned into, like,
right,
as you were saying, like the third vector by which everyone wanted to judge every build is like, okay, yeah, damage
right,
defense. That's like a solved thing. How do I get Magic Find into this build? Because it's the only thing I care about. And it
right.
felt like oppressive from a build making
Well,
perspective.
that can certainly imply that there's a problem there as far as balance goes. Like if that's a thing where where that is the only goal that you would have, that's a concern, right? I get it. And I mean, like,
I,
it's very interesting just talking to some to players about this more. I think because yeah, like as I said, it is an issue I think that is worth discussing again. So yeah, I'm going to talk to people at studio again and reevaluate my feelings about this. Because I guess we're sort of defaulting into how it should work. Like okay, it has been discussed for PoE2 in recent times, but usually speaking, the standard reasons for it to exist come out again, and we just kind of like, oh yeah, this is what we do. I don't think we've had a serious like, okay, how about if we just actually remove this? Let's see what we get, and let's really go through it again. Discussion uh, until like recently. So I'll bring it up again. I already know exactly where the lines will be drawn as far as the design team is concerned. So then we'll just have another. We'll have another. We'll have another argument about it, and that might be
and just
interesting.
to add to this, it's definitely
Mhm.
a different problem in different leagues. Like the league mechanics play a huge
Oh
role in
yeah, for
how
sure.
it actually plays out. So it's not the same amount of problem every league. But if it crops up again and again, and it's kind of like it reduces design space, that's still like a thing to consider, right? Over
Yeah,
time.
no, for sure, for sure.
Yep.
Um, I think I need to understand more about why it's been more of a problem recently, like the exact triggers of that. Because my previous understanding of geez, I always forget the names of everything. The Forest League. What the hell was that called?
Affliction.
Yeah, Affliction.
Yeah.
Um, that league in particular had a problem where the rewards and the difficulty were not in line. And that is what I believe led to the problems that we had where you could play lower tier maps and get more rewards that way. So I believe that was the league mechanic responsible for that due to not having that aligned correctly.
Yeah.
So it might be that it is just that and we just need to avoid that, or it might be that there's a deeper issue because I assume that your people are feeling that way this league also. And I'm not like immediately aware of what it is about this league that would cause that as such. So there's something about this perhaps that I don't understand. And I probably need to understand what that is to be able to,
Yeah.
to be able to work on this problem.
I
Because
don't
yeah,
want to
like
like
if you
shift the whole discussion to this, but yeah,
right.
yeah,
Because the thing is like,
yeah.
why is this an issue now? Why was this not an issue 4 years ago? You know, like there has to be something going on that's led to that.
Obviously it's different from league to league, but this has always been kind of like creeping up, but it was never like in the light as much as it
Right.
was
But you
recently.
say
It was
creeping
never
up, and
as
it's like, but
extreme.
what is it about it that's been creeping up? Like, what changes have been happening that caused this to creep? Um,
I think it's also that okay, this is a little bit more like further away, but there's a lot more fragments nowadays that you use for maps, for example. That you so I remember back in the day, like Legacy League, I think it was 2.6, kind of popped that off with like League Stones, I think they were called back then,
yeah,
where you guys were kind of testing like scarabs that are now basically scarabs,
yeah,
and other things like sextants. And I think that the problem was also that those are per map. So now what you have is if somebody gets more currency out of one map that costs a fixed amount, that causes a problem where other people get priced out of that content, kind of,
sure,
because now the price of those things is now priced around the people who get the most out of it, right?
yeah.
So I think over time it has just kind of been compounding and compounding and compounding, and obviously also power creep plays a big role here, where a lot of skills were just able to outshine the content with almost no gear. So now you slap on quant gear, and yeah, so all of these issues together. It's not an easy problem to solve. I'm just
For sure.
yeah.
Okay.
Also, borrowed power is a big thing there, where yeah, obviously the
Yeah, I guess
leagues
so.
have made you a lot powerful.
Well, I mean, that would sort of seem to imply that the content isn't scaling far enough compared to how it used to, which implies that the power level of characters is overall higher relative to the content. And that would sort of imply that, but then at the same time, okay, well, yeah, all right. There's some things to think about here for sure. All right, well, as I said, I'll have a discussion in
Yeah.
the studio again about it. I do
And
think
once
it's an interesting
again,
topic.
yeah, this is I'm not speaking for everybody
Right.
here. There's like just one perspective.
But the question then, the main question for me is it something where the reason why it's bad merely because of other factors and therefore it could be good if the other factors weren't a problem? Or is it that it's actually just generally bad and therefore, and it always
That's the
was, and for some
question.
reason nobody noticed before? Which I guess I find harder to believe, because like it was fine for so long.
So I mean, when I talk to people, for example, in party play,
Yeah.
where it's way more exaggerated, that's like a whole other thing. But I can't really talk
Yeah.
for them. But yeah, that's something to definitely think on. Yeah.
Because I mean, ultimately, there are more multiplicative factors around that will like okay. Effectively, what I believe then is occurred here is that the value of an item find mod on your character is higher because the other multiplicative factors are so much higher. And so effectively,
Yeah.
like what would have had a certain value before has now effectively increased due to the other things. So like sure, I guess that is the reason.
I guess the way you can also think about it, not being too complicated about this, but for example, if the entry cost to a juiced map is like 1 divine, and a normal build gets out 1.2 divines, and a build with 100% quant would get like 2.4 divines. Obviously, that's not how it works, but like just to simplify it, the profit margin goes crazy because the entry cost is always flat, right? Like that's also kind of, I guess, yeah. But.
All right. Well, sure. Moving on.
Okay.
Moving on.
No, I think that was a good discussion. So my next question, we were trying to keep them all related, is the way that PoE1 has ended up its synergy and reliance on like trade and economy and the way it's balanced around it. It almost feels like you kind of, it's been stated that SSF is kind of like the challenge mode and the game is kind of balanced around trade, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a plan around PoE2 and it being based around the economy, high volume of trades, bulk trades and all that? Or, is it going to be more of, hey, I picked up a cool item. Maybe I'm going to look at it. Obviously, that's the dream. You guys always talk about it. Like, I want to pick up, Chris talks about picking up a rare in your T16 map and everyone laughs. Like, I turned rares off on my loot filter on day 2, right?
Sure.
Is PoE2, are you guys going to like really, really focus on trying to prevent, the pure trade economic basis of the game? You can argue that the game's become so big, PoE1's become so big because of that. But yeah, just curious on your thoughts there.
I've always felt that trade's very important, and so does Chris. Like, you need to be able to get the feeling like you're going to trade something. And so long as there is that feeling, trade has some kind of advantage. So you do have to consider that. But certainly, we're trying to design a system so that you feel like you could get good items even outside of trade. And that is something that I still believe in, and like we will try to do. So like, yeah, it's going to be tricky, especially now that we want to have instant buyouts. But I believe that it can be done. It's like, yeah, like I don't know. There's really not a lot to say about this, but I believe it can be done. Some people I know are very against trade, and we do have a league for that. But like I believe it should be okay. It really is more of a question for Chris, since he's so he's kind of the holder of the torch for all of the kind of item and trade economy type things. But we certainly changed our mindset about about what players want as far as the stuff goes. So we just have to really avoid it getting too out of hand. Where you get so much inflation in the high end that things become unavailable to anyone who's not doing the stuff we just talked about. So yeah, that's the concern. But I believe we can do it.
Lance, I think.
What was that? Sorry,
Lance.
Oh, okay.
You wanted to talk about?
This will be pretty unrelated to. Well, it'll have some relations to trade and economy a little bit, but this has a tie-in to making items valuable on the ground while also being in relation to crafting. We've seen a lot of the orbs being significantly changed, and the idea is you can pick something off the ground, you can be able to edit it and change it and improve it, right? Take a chance on it, and that makes the item you drop on the ground more interesting. What I am curious about in terms of current PoE crafting, you can take something from 0 and make it amazing. Is that still going to be a thing in PoE where you can take a base or an item and craft it from the ground, or is that
Yep.
something we're leaving behind? How do those coexist together?
Absolutely, you can do that. The difference is that we don't have scouring anymore. And so effectively, if you're going to do that process, you may need more bases, if you know what I mean. Like you can't just use one white. You're not going to have one white base, and that's you're like it. You're not going to have one white base, and it's like, well, if I screw it up, I just scour it and do it again, which means that white bases will be more valuable because if you screw one up, you have to get another one, and so that does change the economy a little bit around that stuff. But you can absolutely take an item from white to being great. You'll just need more of them.
So what I'm hearing is it is pretty much unlikely that you're going to be able to. You're not going to be able to take one base. You're going to need to take
You're going
a
to need
bunch of
multiple
and just.
bases. You're going to need multiple bases, but at the same time, like that base is like if you've got valuable white bases, it means that you're actually going to want to pick those up. Like there is pretty much no base type in PoE1 that is valuable really because like they're so like once you've got one, that's the only one you ever need. And that's something that that is something we did want to change to make it so there's actually some value in that stuff, and that will mean that there's more interest in all the different rarities again, which is something that we were wanting to try and achieve there.
Now, speaking to somebody who gets into crafting a lot, this
Mhm.
is probably not a, this is probably gonna be pretty concerning for a lot of people that like crafting because
Mhm.
a lot of people that like crafting are basically spending a lot of their time in the hideout working on one item, and this will change it to a place where they are probably having to go and buy a bunch of those bases or not really. There's crafting hideout gameplay is not something you could really chain together based on this
You
change.
I guess that is a change in a way, but so what you're saying is that this is effectively what you're saying is you want to be able to craft items. Okay, so due to trade, you can always just do crafting, right? But the thing is, effectively, there's going to be like if you want to craft something from the ground up from just white, it's definitely going to take more white bases to be able to do that. That being said, there's still other crafting methods that can. Well, it's a little bit. I guess I have to see how it all shakes out exactly, but like the scouring change is definitely the one that's like the important one there. Yes, you're going to need more white bases if you want to do stuff. You may take a few white bases. I mean, so this except that you can still re-roll stuff with chaos. It's just that you might lose the right mod that you want, and yeah, sure, there's some stuff there. But is that really fundamentally different than before? I guess it isn't because well, the difference is. Well, no, yeah, no, it still works. Okay, right. So I'm pretty sure. I mean, look, okay. So with a single white base, of course, you can continue to craft it. It's just that when you lose the mod, the number of operations you have to do to get the mod back might still make it more worthwhile to use a white base after all. So consider, like, for example, when you alch something, you're getting effectively more mods that you're adding to the items. There's more chance to get the mod that you like. Whereas when you're using Chaos Orb, you only lose a mod and add a mod, so therefore, like the chance that like you only get one more mod per currency item versus an alchemy where you get more. So effectively, by using an alch and white bases, you're getting to see 4 times the amount of mods that you would have otherwise got to see. So that's
Okay.
the difference between what you have before. So you can still use the same base if you want. It's just that you're losing out on the efficiency of the number of currency items per mod that you see.
Now, real quick there,
Mhm.
this is just something I noticed when I was looking at like the preview on the
Mhm.
PoE2 site. All the rares have 4 mods. Is that a change from the ability to get
No,
6
no, it's
mods, or
still 4 to
4 is the
6.
limitation?
It's still 4 to 6.
Okay.
I'm not sure why all the mods there. I'm not sure why all the rares there happens to have 4. It's just a
Yeah, I thought
random.
I was thinking it was a coincidence, but then you just
Yeah,
said
yeah.
4 just now, and so my
Oh,
brain was just
that's
like,
because
wait.
that's because alchs add 4 mods,
So they
specifically.
no longer are going to
Yeah,
have
so
the
those
like
don't roll more, but there's still
variability.
2 more slots after you've used it.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So that means that a dropped rare has more will usually have more mods than than an alched rare. But then you can still add more with Exalt and everything as well.
Okay.
Are we expecting because of these changes on average, maybe like all of your crafted gear will start off with 4 mods? Are you thinking maybe the game will be a little bit more balanced around having 4, maybe 5 mods on your average gear, or it's like a
I
different
mean,
calculation?
not necessarily. Like, I mean, the part of the reason for doing this is that we wanted to allow you to use the crafting bench stuff more easily. And so that's the crafting bench will mean that effectively, like, even if you're just going even if you're going for alch, you're still going to want to then add a mod to the crafting bench. So
No matter what. Okay. Yeah.
like, there's no matter what. So they're still going to have 5 mods at least, I would imagine. So yeah, you still end up with that sort of stuff. But I mean, I guess you would say that because the average rare has 5 mods anyway, that's kind of what we imagined that most players would generally have on an item. But I mean, it's sort of hard to know exactly because I mean, we'll balance it based on what we actually see when we see what the average player power is. Like that requires a lot of playthroughs and everything to work out. So yeah, we'll just see what we end up with there.
So, in the Josh interview, you made a small, like, I guess, side comment where you talked about the words you used were you guys brutally overscoped certain things of the game. For example, I
Right.
think in that you talk about like how many mob types you had to make.
Mhm.
Is there since we've now been, I mean, I think PoE 2 was first announced in 2019, if I remember
Yes.
correctly. And there's now been a lot of time, and obviously there was COVID in between and everything.
Mhm.
Is there any like is there any concern that the project might be a little bit have gotten too big and maybe there's no like not at the end to tie it all together? Do you have any concern with that? Maybe to tone it down a little bit? Is there any consideration there, or is this? Yeah,
The problem is that we definitely like. There's a reason why we gave it the scope that it had. Like we want to make sure that the campaign, like, really, what it comes down to is we want there to be a game that feels like it's as big as PoE 1 is. Because anything less than that feels like a downgrade.
it kind of impossible though on release, right? Like PoE
Well, I
1 also
mean,
started
sure, it
somewhere and
is.
build upon it.
It is when you consider like all the leagues and everything, but we want to we still want to make sure that it feels like a substantial, like bigger game. And
Sure.
So we kind of did what we felt was the minimum to achieve that. And that's still a lot. Especially with the quality standard that we have now. And that's really the thing, is that if we were making all the stuff with PoE 1 level of quality, then it wouldn't take nearly as long as it has. But making all the stuff with the PoE 2 level of quality has certainly taken longer than we expected. But I mean, look, we've got most of it now. So, like, as much as we may have regretted picking a game this size, I mean, like, with this is what we've got. Like that just means that it will be good. But yeah, like, what I guess I do wish is that we were like, I really wanted to get it out last year. That was my sort of real like goal, and we didn't manage to succeed at that. So from that perspective, I suppose there's some regret there. But I mean, like, the product that we will have a crazy amount of stuff going on. So I'm still very happy with that. I honestly don't know what we could really have done to do better than that, if you know what I mean. Like, as I said, all the stuff we did felt like that was important to do. There wasn't really a lot that, I mean, there's going to be some content that will be cut temporarily and then will get added in a bit later. So there was some stuff to cut there, but like, you need to feel like you've got a reasonably significant campaign, and the bar for what you need in a game like this is so high. Like, if you've got a game like D4 coming out and people immediately saying there's not enough content in it, I mean, like that. The bar you have to meet is observably very high. So I guess I don't feel bad about our attempt to meet that bar in that regard.
Did you ever think about exactly, especially now that the beta is delayed a little bit, pushing out like a demo of the first few acts to kind of grasp where players feel like this is going, and maybe assure people or maybe get some broader feedback?
Well, the problem that I have with that is that so when I was playing No Rest for the Wicked recently, and I wasn't aware of how much content there was in that game when I played it. I was just playing it, and I got to the end of the content, and then I immediately felt extremely let down. And partly that's just an expectation problem, because I was expecting it to be the whole game. I just didn't realize that they weren't doing that yet. But it's like, it sort of felt like, well, what was the point? You know what I mean? Like, and I was kind of gearing up for like, oh, there's going to be like all these crafting systems, and I see all the stuff that I'm going to use in the future, and like none of it ended up mattering because they haven't added all the content yet for that. And that, as I said, that was a real disappointment. And I really want to avoid that feeling. Like, I want it to feel like when the game comes out that it is a full game, and that's important to me. So you could maybe argue that like having an earlier demo would be better. But then why would it really be better? Because at the end of the day, if we release a good game, then people will like it no matter when it comes out.
Yeah.
Like, you may want to be assured that the game's going to be good now, but really, won't you still play it when it comes out later?
I will.
So, yeah, so effectively,
I often
like
don't.
I would rather leave a,
No,
I'd rather leave a
I
better
meant more
first
as a tool
impression.
for you guys to
Yeah.
like
Right.
feel out where people feel like, because
Sure.
you give certain creators obviously access. You hear what journalists have to say, right?
Yeah.
But obviously, as you know, when you release a league and a million people test it, there's like
Right.
completely different.
But we only have
Yeah.
one chance. We only have one chance to leave a first impression, and so I'd rather
True.
have the initial test that we're doing be smaller, so that we can be more certain that what we're doing is right. Like, for example, if we had launched PoE 2 and the Flask system was the way that it was in the demo we just did, then people would have been really angry, and we would have had bad Steam reviews, and things that launched would have just gone way worse. And so, like, it's definitely better that we got that out of the way at an event where then we can go and make some changes afterwards. And I think that as much as you can just say, okay, well, we'll make more changes later, I do think that there's a lot of players who will have who will try it once and will quit and never play again, even if you fix the problems. And so I want to make sure that we're getting that right. And I don't think that having a larger demo where we have the ability for that to happen is the right move. I'd much rather have smaller, like, I think you can learn a lot from 50 people, and I don't know that you learn a lot more from 5,000 people, if you know what I mean.
Okay.
So I'd rather kind of keep those numbers like relatively small until we're ready to the point where we have a large test. That being said, we are planning on doing some somewhat larger tests before the early access. So we've talked about how we're going to have an alpha. That alpha will be a bit larger. And the main reason why we're going to be doing that is there's going to be heavy segmentation. So what that means is that we want to test, like, okay, we've got a group here who've never played Diablo before. We've got a group here who've never played PoE before, and they have played, they have played Diablo. We've got a group over here who's like just an action game players. We've got a group over here who does this, who does that, right? You know what I mean? And we can get different reactions from all those players and see how that works for all those people, like what they understand and what they, what extra help they might need, or the sort of stuff. And you do need a few more players to be able to work out that kind of feedback. So we will actually do a that kind of testing a little bit later in the year.
Do we know?
What was that? Sorry.
Do we have a date? It's a perfect time.
I have a date.
Oh, okay. All right.
I'm not one that I'm going to tell to you, but effectively, so that'll be happening, and that larger test will, allow us to do some stuff. But once again, you kind of you don't necessarily need that many people in each group. The main thing is that you're just doing a lot of work to sort of segment the users. Yeah, sure, one of those groups will be like ultra hardcore PoE players, and we'll see how they respond. But it's funny because it's like the hard part for us is getting the users who aren't PoE players, right? Like, if I want PoE players to play PoE 2, then we've got to line out the door. It's the people who've never played PoE before that we need to try and sign up and get some people to try some things. So yeah, like all of that stuff is going to be is going to be important to do. Sorry, I don't even remember what we were talking about now, but oh, that's right, the overscope thing. But yeah, so anyway, yeah, as I said, it sort of sucks that we chose that before, but I don't really regret it still, because of the fact that I think you need bigger games in this genre. I think it's important.
True, because you just mentioned D4. I guess, was that one of the reception to D4 in terms of scope? Was that one of your reasons why you delayed the beta?
No. I mean,
No?
the scope has not changed since before and after the delay. The scope is, in terms of content, has been the same the whole time. It's just that I use that as an example of why this genre needs a big scope, yeah. Well, yeah. So that's what it is.
Okay.
All right. So now we have a list of community questions that we've gathered. And we're just trying to get through these as quickly as we can so we get the answers for the folks out there. Honestly, the number one thing that I've been asked by so many people is regarding console. PoE is actually, apparently, it has been growing quite a bit. I hear more and more every single day from people that are on console and like playing PoE, but they also don't like being second-class citizens, and there's so many downsides with that. Is there any work that's able to be done? I was in the game industry myself as well, and you might not be able to say it publicly, but I've worked with Sony, and they, I know how bad it can be. So, feel free to blink twice if that's the issue. But yeah, is there any work towards getting parity with that?
There will be more. Unfortunately, I can't talk about it right now. But we are going to be talking about our console plans at some point in the relatively near future, and there'll be a lot more to say around that. So
Okay.
yeah, unfortunately, not something we can talk about quite yet. But yes, it is one of those things where as soon as you're working with an external partner, everything around what you can say and what you can do changes very significantly, since you've got another person who, other people who are caring about that. So I can't be quite as cavalier as
Yeah.
I usually would be able to be. But yeah, unfortunately, not a satisfactory answer, but we'll get there soon.
The Poke EU is asking about stuff like codex from D4 or prototype items from Torchlight, where you have end game chase items that you can acquire in a weaker state earlier to basically start playing your builds that kind of revolve around these
Right.
items. Just in case, like a stepping stone. Is that something you guys ever considered?
I'm not really a huge fan of it, but that being said, I believe we do have a few cases of uniques. We've got kind of like a lighter version of a similar stat that we've made in the past. Like for PoE1, I'm talking about. That's like a thing that we've done. But I
Oh,
wouldn't
yeah.
say that it's like an overall philosophy that I particularly love. Like I sort of understand the desire, right, to like I want to finish my build early or something like that. But
Or
I guess not really.
started.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, sure.
Mhm.
I guess you could say that way. Different view of it, but yeah. Personally, don't know if I'm like a huge fan of it. Honestly, like there were, I mean, I guess like quite a few games have had things where there's like items that level with you through the whole game, but to me, it just sort of feels like it removes a lot of the fun of like having new items later. So I'm just not really a fan of that type of thing. But I do see what you're talking about, where you like you have a lighter version of the stat, and there might be a few cases where we would consider something like that. Like if something's really important, and I suppose we could consider something like it, but it's not like an overall idea that I would that I love.
For a little bit different thing, for movement skills tied to abilities, the example
Mhm.
I'm thinking of, the ice meteor skill where the sorceress jumps backwards. Is there any concern or ability where players could say, hey, I don't necessarily want to time my movement and be forced into this animation? Say, like a boss is doing a cone frontal attack towards you and you'd rather dodge to the right or to the left. Is there those skills just a little locked into that, or is that something people would be able to
So
disable or
some
change?
some skills they change how they move depending on where you target. So like that can kind of matter. But we have to be a bit careful with that because it can feel strange if you've got a sudden like switch. But generally speaking, the movement being part of the skill doesn't usually feel bad because it's kind of usually a motion that you want to be doing anyway in that skill. So the comet thing, like there's usually not a reason why it's bad to move backwards. It's kind of just like it would be an very unusual situation. So the reason why you move backwards, by the way, with the comet is to get yourself away from where the center of the location is. So if you use Comet far away, your character won't move backwards. If you use Comet really close to your character, then your character will move back so that you're not inside where the comet is hitting, which looks really dumb. So generally speaking, I can't really think of a situation where Comet would move you back where that would be a thing that you wouldn't want anyway. Yeah, like we do try and think about this as we're designing these, like so we don't have an issue like that. Now, this has actually come up with a few skills in the past where, like, we've had situations where skills look a lot better if they have movement in them, but we don't want to move them because it's technically disadvantageous to the player. So an example of that one is Falling Thunder, where it would be visually better if that always moved you forward. It looks a bit lame when you do it on the spot. But because of the fact that you don't like it, that thing can use projectiles, and getting you closer to the monsters would be bad. Generally speaking, if what you're using it for is the projectiles, we do not have the movement if you use the skill close to your character, and that is a like just an example of a concession to make sure that that the player always has control over that kind of movement. So we are basically doing those kinds of concessions if there was a situation we believe where the player could potentially not want to move. And what that should mean is that anytime you're moving, it's because either there's no disadvantage to moving or you want to move. You know what I mean? Yeah, if there's any skills where people are like, oh, it sucks that I have to move when using the skill, that is a problem. Yeah, we're trying to fix that.
So it
So
is
it's like a
something
rough.
you'd be.
What was that? Sorry.
Go,
Sorry.
pal.
No, sorry. No, go. You go.
I was gonna say, so it is a scenario where, say, you guys designed it away, you thought it would have no issues, and then if the player base says, "Hey, this has issues. We don't like it this way," you would be opening to.
I'm
removing
open to
some
changing
of
that. Yes. There might. Look, I'm not going to say that's 100% always the case. Like, there might be a skill I could imagine that will just like be completely like just really suck if it doesn't involve moving in some way. But I mean, we try not to design that, right? Like we try to, when we're doing the design, to just work out what it is that needs to happen with regard to that. So yeah, a lot of skills have movement based on how far away you click to try and make it context sensitive.
Okay.
What am I? I'm next. Yeah, that's just a quick question. There's a lot of minion lovers out there. We haven't seen anything from
Yep.
minions yet.
Still to announce later, unfortunately.
Still to announce later. Okay.
Yeah, we're still waiting for that one.
That's it.
Enemy of Trust is asking about transfigured gems from PoE 1. Are they going to have a place in PoE 2 maybe eventually? Or is it just something that you think is specialized to PoE 1?
Yep, I believe so. There's a lot of skills where we design them and like, should we go do thing number A or should we do thing number B? And we pick thing number A, but we're like, but B would have been cool too. And then we're like, sure, let's make a transfigured gem for that later. So there's like a ton of opportunities there for us to do that. I'm sure we will do a lot of that stuff. And a lot of the time, the skills have already when we're prototyping, the skills already have like stats, like internal stats that like allow us to change them from one behavior to the other, just so that we can test stuff. And so in some cases, like it would be very easy to make an alternative gem that works a different way based on stats. And in a lot of cases, like there might be a skill where it's like, okay, this would work really well in this situation, but this other one is like way more common, and so that's the way we're going to go with. But we can imagine that some players might want to do the other thing for a certain type of build in some other regard. And that's all a bit vague, but yes, basically like transfigured gems make sense for those sorts of cases where we want to flip the way a skill works from one behavior to another. There's a lot of skills that we could use that we could do that stuff with.
Nice.
For something that has probably been asked multiple times at this point, but I'm going to ask it again. Ascendancies, PoE 2 versus PoE 1. How big of a change are you guys looking at? And
so I mean, we showed some ascendancy classes in the past in 2019. Almost certainly by now, a lot of that stuff will be different, just because these things evolve over time. But I mean, ascendancy classes are the thing that that your character is locked into, as it were, like that is your class effectively, like the thing that you where you can't get it across all the different classes. So therefore, we need to make sure that all the things on the ascendancy class are ultra impactful. And I would like to try and do more things on ascendancy classes in general, where like they feel like very fundamentally change how you play. Like how when I was talking about uniques earlier, and the little details that you do to kind of make something feel unique. I think we can do a lot of things like that with ascendancy classes as well, where they just feel like they change something where like there's more detail about what it changes about your character than just here's a stat. But like that is hard to do, but I think can be fun. So I guess that doesn't really say a lot, but like ideally it's like what PoE 1 is doing, but more ambitious, I guess, with regard to what kind of stuff we'll open up.
is there any world where I can get you to give us one example?
Probably I shouldn't. I would say ascendancy classes have very high value as far as like like being able to announce stuff. So we'll save those ones, I think.
I had to try.
Yeah, fair enough.
Is there any consideration about like endgame in PoE now has gotten in PoE 1 has mostly gotten to the point of like it's reactive gameplay is rather difficult, where things have gotten very spiky. Like power creep's been intense on both player and monster side. And is that just a thing that is, I assume the answer is just gonna be yes, but like is that a thing that is a concern of like?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we just have to make sure that it's not cut out of control.
Yeah, like
I mean, there's not really much to say about it, but yes, we just have to make sure that things are right.
Yeah, degens in PoE 1 have just gotten so insane that it's yeah.
I mean, I think that's just partly because of the fact that there's sort of scaling that's done sort of somewhat algorithmically on a lot of that stuff, and when we scale up the content, like the degens get scaled as well, and then maybe they shouldn't be scaling exactly the same way that other stuff is, or like there's stuff that's probably should be non-linear there that isn't like that. So yeah, I imagine. I mean, it's possible that that's something that Mark might need to look into anyway. In PoE 1. So although I can't speak for him, but yes, like it's something that we do need to care about for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Great.
Big Dev is asking, is there going to be a lore connection between PoE1 and PoE2? And furthermore, is there going to be a connection in terms of, for example, how Blizzard does it? You buy one game, you get a pet in the other, or something like that. Is there going to be like, are you trying to
Oh,
also convert people into
I mean,
PoE1, sort of say?
I mean,
Quote,
all
unquote?
of the microtransactions are available on both games already, so you
Sure.
already have all your
Yeah.
pets in PoE2 right now.
Yep.
So yes, I suppose from that perspective it is the case. But
Yeah.
the as far as lore is concerned, yeah, I mean, absolutely, there's a lot of references from one to the other. There's characters that return and so on. Like, there's all sorts of stuff going on there. There's lots of stuff, but the not so much ideally that other players who weren't playing PoE1 would really feel like they were missing out. We just have to make sure that it feels like a game that's standalone in that regard, while having plenty of stuff for PoE1 lore people to look at and realize, oh yeah, that that's to do with this. So yeah, we try to maintain that, and try to not make too many retcons also, although it can be hard sometimes.
And then one little thing that I just saw a few minutes ago was in PoE1 we have now seen players have now gained a little bit of traction recently with the gain of some quality of life things. Has that philosophy also translated a little bit to PoE2 with some, kind of reducing the amount of clicks and kind of allowing us to
what I would say is that I think that doing PoE2 work recently is what is inspiring the PoE1 change, actually.
Oh, it's actually
because
us the whole time. Okay, all right.
and the reason is because when we like in PoE2, it's like, okay, we need to make a change here because this is something that players are unhappy about. So we change it in PoE2, and then we're like, oh, well, actually, now that we've done this, it's like maybe we could just do this in PoE1. There's a lot of that happening, and that also was happening around the first-time user experience testing we were doing as well, where we were like, okay, like since we haven't done that for a very long time in PoE1, it's like you kind of lose focus on like some of that stuff. So then you do some testing in PoE2, and then you're like, well, hang on, like players are having problems with this. Like, well, why is it like this in PoE1 again? Like. It's kind of interesting how like just revisiting and rethinking about everything from scratch again kind of then makes you think like, well, maybe we should change it in PoE1 as well. I think that stuff has just had a positive influence on PoE1 there, just generally, and I think that's part of the reason why some of that stuff has been happening. But it's also just because like Mark's been taking a keen interest in what the community's been unhappy about and so on as well. Like it's a mix. I do think that part of the attitude shift there, that if you feel like the attitude has changed, I think that is where that change is coming from. It's just working on a fresh game again kind of makes you, makes you revisit all those ideas.
Mm-hmm. It's been much appreciated for sure.
Yep.
Thank you. All right.
I think we got to everything.
Yeah. Plus, it's been 2 hours now.
Exactly 2 hours. Exactly.
Yeah, that's like almost right on the dot. Yeah. Look at that, respecting your time. we lined it up.
I think I've got a job interview to do very soon.
Oh,
that is to say, interviewing someone else. So,
where are you going? you're interviewing someone else. Oh, okay, all right.
I'm going to interview someone. And we'll need to get going very shortly. But it's always very enjoyable to have a chat. So thank you very much.
All right, excellent. Yeah, it was great talking to you.
It was awesome, very enlightening. Yep.
Very good. All right then. But yeah, if you guys want to like sign off or something like that, then
I guess we're gonna sign off. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you everybody for watching. Thanks for your time as well, Jonathan.
Least awkward ending of all time.
Thank you very much for having me. So thank you.
Yeah.
See you later.
Bye,
all right. Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.